Maxplosion.
Are these coming from the Discord channel or your soft core porn collection?
Is landing spot a bigger deal than talent? Christian Watson and Denzel Mims are the exact same player, except one went to Green Bay to play with Aaron Rodgers, and the other was banished to the Mad Max wasteland of New York. Should good players to crappy situations be avoided at all costs? This is a family show.
This is the free show. Wait for the nerd for that word.
So what do you guys think?
Well,
landing spot.
While Rich is taking a drink, I will say.
Let's dissect this one. First of all, Christian Watson and Denzel Mims, same players?
They had some similarities,
right? Size, speed freaks.
Yeah, I don't know that I would say that they were the exact same.
Right.
I would say they're the same and they're both risky.
Yeah, they were both players with upside.
Athletically gifted with similar upside, right?
One had
but a little
to
unrefined.
Baylor.
Yeah, one went to Baylor where no good wide receivers ever come from.
And one went to North Dakota, which we don't know.
Everybody is going to go North Dakota.
Big time question mark, right?
So yeah, I don't know that they're truly the exact same, but for the argument, I understand why he picked those two players.
Yep.
I am a pretty strong believer in the opposite, though.
Me too.
I'm going to take talent over situation, especially because how fluid, especially in today's NFL, how fluid situations are. So, like, think about any team, literally any team, and think about where they were 2 years ago versus where they are now. Browns. Half of them have different quarterbacks. Half of them have other players that weren't there. Like, situations are so fluid. So I would be on the opposite. We've seen a lot of really talented players go to bad situations and just make something of it. Garrett Wilson this year.
That was going to be my perfect example.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to look any further than his teammate. I mean, That's it. He's an ultra talented guy that was in the same situation, literally the same exact situation as Denzel Mims, but he overcame it because his talent translated to the NFL, and he looks fantastic.
Yeah, A.J. Brown, when he went to Tennessee, nobody wanted him to go to Tennessee. Everyone was like, oh, my gosh. Hollywood Brown, when he went to Baltimore.
Right.
Like, the good players still make something of themselves. Do they maybe hit their max absolute ceiling? Probably not. Right. A.J. Brown would be much better with Patrick Mahomes than he would have been in Tennessee. But, yes, I'm still going to go talent over situation. I'm not saying situation has no bearing on it. That'll move little things here and there for me. But I'm not going to move players up a whole tier or two just based on situation.
No,
yeah,
I think
rise to the top.
I think it should be a tiebreaker. If you have guys on equal footing from a talent standpoint, you go with a person with a better situation. That's how I view it anyway. I don't think you just automatically write people off that are in bad situations. So
yeah, and most of the really, really good players go to bad teams because they have higher draft picks. Mm-hmm. So it's just the way that situation ends up. You know, it's and this is Dynasty. It's a long-term game, right? Like, we're not looking for year one explosion, onto the scene because
Maxplosions, please.
Maxplosion. That's how it works. And usually, and you should be okay with that when you're picking the top because you don't want listen, like if you're getting a 1-1 or Garrett Wilson, like, okay, you would like to have the 1-1 next year too to get Marvin Harrison Jr. So like you want to come in, look good enough and just good enough where you're not winning enough games, right? Because you want this to all come together at the same time, which is right around like year 3 and slowly get a little bit better here and get a little bit of luck on your side as well. But like these guys said, the talent will always overcome for the most part. Because when you guys said that, you said Pat Mahomes, I was like, man, how many touchdowns would Devontae Adams score with Pat Mahomes? 30?
Maybe.
So yeah, there's better situations than others, but for the most part, you could also argue that, hey, this person's on a really bad team. Well, guess what? They're going to throw the football a ton, right? The odds of when you have the Chiefs and the ball's rolling, a lot of those guys aren't even playing in the fourth quarter because the game's out of hand a lot of times. When you got to throw the ball a ton because you're playing behind, players like that could be in a better situation. Drake London has a better chance to take a big step forward next year because he's the focal point of that offense. It's not just the team they're on. It's just about opportunity as well. If a running back gets drafted and he's really talented and he sits behind Josh Jacobs or Nick Chubb, yeah, that kind of hurts. It's a different situation. But today's NFL, definitely with the receiver position, at no point should you be worried about, they have another really good receiver. We see year in, year out, multiple teams have that number one receiver. People slept on Devontae Smith this year. Yep. When we were sitting on this podcast saying, don't sleep on Devontae Smith. Like, this guy could outproduce A.J. Brown. Like, he's that talented. And what do we end up with the season, even with the Jalen Hurts? we ended up with 2 wide receiver ones on the same team.
Right.
T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, 2 quality wide receiver ones that you want to have on the same team. You don't have to worry about situations like that anymore. The cream will rise to the top.
So I guess carrying on your point here, the wide receiver position might be a little bit different than, say, the running back position, right? Because the wide receivers, there's multiple wide receivers on the field at any given moment. But a position like running back is a little bit stickier and a little bit trickier in the fact that there's usually, I mean, there's exceptions. There's usually only one of those guys on the field at a time. So that situation can get a little bit trickier, and maybe more weight should be put on those situations. But ultimately, if the person behind the person that's a starter is more talented, they will find the field.
A la the team that just won last night, missing 4 extra points, the Dallas Cowboys. They have a running back that the owner comes out and literally strokes his ego and says the offense runs through him. He's the guy. He's making $20 million a year. But then you have a guy like Tony Pollard who is just too good not to put on the field. And even in his half of the carries, he ends up being a running back 1. Right. So, again, that talent will rise. And we see it. We see it with the Austin Ecklers. We see it with the Michael Turners. These guys get opportunity, and they just have to be involved in the game plan.
What if the situation isn't that they're buried behind a bad player? Maybe what if it's the offensive line in front of the player?
And I do think that we've seen that happen before, where good players good running backs go to bad offensive lines, good quarterbacks go to bad offensive lines, and it does affect their play. But ultimately, long term, good players figure it out. Yeah. Like, good players figure out a way, whether it's, okay, I'm going to be more utilized in the passing game than to get. That was Saquon his rookie year. Mm-hmm. Elite player.
Garbage offensive line.
Offensive line. What did he do? RB1 season based on mostly because of his receiving more so than his rushing. So good players tend to find a way to make it happen. Will they hit their max potential on a bad team? No. But they're still going to show you that they're an elite player.
I think Najee is another guy as well. I mean, a guy I think he's volume dependent, and he went to a team that will give him the volume. The offensive line is not good there in front of him, but he still gets it done from a fantasy.
He's still solid. He's not what he could be.
He's talented enough. You know what I mean? That he's a good asset for fantasy, but he got the volume.
And I think we see this happen often too, where players will get drafted to a team that already has an established running back, and that always scares people. We saw it happen with Jonathan Taylor and Marlon Mack. We saw it happen with Nick Chubb and Carlos Hyde. We saw it happen with Joe Mixon and Jeremy Hill. We saw that happen. Like, we've seen this story happen over and over, where teams spend a first or second, maybe not as much third, but if teams are using a second round pick on you, I don't care
James Cook this year. I mean, by the end of the year, he was taking over.
If they use
Kenneth Walker, Rashad Penny.
Sure.
Yeah, the only exception to that rule has ever been Penny and Carson. That's the only exception I've ever seen to that rule. But part of that was because Penny was always banged up as well. Never got a chance to really get his footing. Other than that, I've never seen a first or second round running back not take at least a good chunk of that rushing workload. Maybe not all of it, but a good chunk.
Javonte Williams hasn't yet.
Well, he got hurt.
Sure. I love him. I just in my brain went, he's not getting enough.
He will.
He will. Darn it.
And going back to the game of patience sometimes as well, which sometimes is playing Dynasty, it's a hard thing to do, right? Like, it's a hard thing to be patient when you're paying your entry fee and you know you're coming in last place and you're like, I got to make these moves. Like you mentioned, offensive line, a competent NFL GM will identify those holes and make that better. You know, what did the Giants do? They went out and drafted Andrew Thomas. They built that offensive line up knowing that was a weakness of the team.
Right.
Now the offensive line is playing really well. And who's benefited? Daniel Jones is looking like a very good quarterback. Who's an asset in Dynasty fantasy football. Yes. I'm so glad as being the former president, I have so many shares. And Saquon looking like his old self. And now what are we saying? Oh, this team needs to get a really good receiver, right?
Yeah.
And at the same time, they like Isaiah Hodgins has looked really good out there.
Slayton's making it work.
They're all free agents. We'll see how that works out. So
we'll see.